So let's start with our opening fireside of the day. We are joined by Patric Stadtfeld, Regional Chief Procurement Officer at Siemens, and our subject is the evolving role of supply chain leaders. A warm welcome for Patric, please.
Morning, Neil. How are you?
The role of leadership within procurement and supply chain is something that absolutely fascinates me personally at the moment. I know we were at one of our tech and AI events a couple of weeks ago in London, and it was a huge discussion point about how leadership is having to adapt and change and show humility when they're trying new things. So it's a subject that is absolutely fascinating for me at the moment. But where I'd like to start, if I can, is evolution and how that leadership skill set has changed in the last 10 years. I'd love to know your thoughts on that to kick off.
Yeah, great, Neil. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the question. But before I want to get started, maybe I do a little bit of pulse check of the audience here today. So first question, maybe by raising your hand. How many of you have cost saving as their primary target? If that's your primary target, please raise your hand. All right. How many of you have cost savings and other KPIs that are equally important as their targets? All right, so it's a little bit of 50-50 split, and I think that's exactly what has happened over the last decades, Niels. I think the evolution of procurement supply chain from a cost cutter to a value creator has occurred. What we have done over the last decade or so is really looking how do we, integrate our supply chain procurement organization closer to the business and integrate them into the business on one element. And the other dimension is really looking at digitalization, right? If you think about the digitalization has been also around for over a decade. I mean, we can remember the introduction of RPAs 10 plus years ago, very important and also had some impact on supply chain. But most important really is that the function itself has evolved, and it has evolved from a cost cutter to a true value creator. And in today's world, looking at cost savings only is not going to be as important as it was in the past. There are other elements that we need to focus on, whether it's resilience, quality, innovation, our supplier relationships, and of course our people. So all these are very important elements as part of the evolution of supply chain that needs to be equally in focus, just like cost savings has been in the past. And I think that's something that many organizations have not truly adapted yet. I think there's many more focus and KPIs that need to be equally balanced that are just as important as cost savings moving on forward.
And that does feel like a definite theme of the event yesterday that I was hearing about that difference between just saving money and trying to get the numbers as low as possible, and actually thinking about those ripple effects, the sustainability, reliability, resilience. Is that something you feel really has changed? It's taken that step away from just trying to get that number as low as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we learned throughout the pandemic that just having great cost savings didn't necessarily help us to successfully maneuver through any type of disruptions we experience, right? It ended up really on areas of supplier relationship management. How did we create strategic partnership with our suppliers? If you really just focus on cost savings, you have no relationship with your suppliers. It's a bidding process, it's an RFQ process, and you're comparing A to B, and there's really no relationship management that really occurs. So I think really looking beyond just the cost savings and building the strategic partnerships are so important, particularly in times that we are experiencing right now. I mean, disruptions are occurring on a daily basis.
It very much is. It's so volatile at the moment. For you, how are the best leaders coping with that volatility and that uncertainty?
You know, I think, first of all, I think we have to all agree that the unexpected is the new normal. And that really is something that leaders have to really take to heart, because I remember days when we had commodity strategies that would last 3 years. I haven't seen a strategy that lasted 3 years in the last decade, at least since 2020.
Yeah, how quaint.
Not quite, right? I think the strategies these days are so agile and so not able to last 3 years, and they have to be able to adapt to situations on a regular basis. So I think leadership needs to be aware of that. I think leadership also needs to look at vulnerability in a certain way, that we have to make sure that our supplier networks are agile enough, and that we're making sure that we have not too many single sources and have alternative sourcing options available for our teams to work with. Then, of course, there's always the uncertainty that comes in place as well. And in uncertainty, what do? We need to do what-if scenario planning. What if this or that happens needs to occur within the organizations. And of course, in uncertainty, it's very important to build very, very strong supplier relationships with your suppliers. When you then look into complexity of what we call VUCA, complexity is something that many organizations face. And I think on the procurement side, we need to make sure we kind of continue to streamline our processes and really optimize our sourcing activities within the organization. I think a lot of times when we look at these volatilities, we have very complex organization, very complex processes, and I think it's time also to look in these processes to ensure that we streamline them. And then last but not least, ambiguity is something that we face quite a bit in volatile times, right? And how do we move forward when we talk about ambiguity is really to ensure that we have the right data analytics availability. Data is our number one asset, and it will be moving on forward as digitalization and technology further evolves. And I think what sometimes happens a lot in organization is we don't like to share our data too much with our other cross-functional partners. So that's definitely something we need to continue to get better in as well, is how do we share the data and our inputs and outputs with our cross-functional partners to drive this collaboration together.
Yeah, normally I'm not a fan of acronyms, but VUCA, that's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I'm a big fan of that one. Definitely a big fan of that one. Let's get on to digitalization. We were just touching on technology there.
Sure.
There are so many challenges there because we all know proper implementation of the right tools for the right organization can really change the game. It can make a huge, huge difference. How can leadership go about getting those decisions right? Because there are so many tools out there, so many solutions. If I believed every email that arrived into my inbox about the latest AI gizmo that's going to solve everything, how do you approach that challenge? Because it is not easy.
Yeah, no, it's not easy. And I think you have to start with a cultural mindset that really promotes technology and the transformation that occurs as a result of technology. And we started our transformation at Siemens 10 plus years ago, where we began really focusing first on educating leadership, particular top executives and their next tier leaders to understand what technology is available, what technology can perform, and what can technology achieve. So we did that. And then we kind of took that same approach and educated our employees on that same principle of really understanding the impact of technology and how technology can change their current workspace. On top of that, I think it's very important when we talk about this transformation is that you can buy the best tool on the market. If you have not done your homework and you're cleaning up your existing processes and making sure that they are streamlined and optimized, I always say you can buy the best tool, crap goes in, craps come out, even if you have the best tool in the world. So there's a lot of homework that needs to be done as part of the transformation within big organizations that is really going back to the basics by looking at your processes. Look at the end-to-end process and make sure that the end-to-end process are truly optimized and very streamlined. And then you can plug on top any great tool, and then you should get the results of this tool and the performance of the tool.
Where I want to go next is about communication, and I think this is something all of us are culpable, sort of guilty of at times, about the clarity of communication and the importance of that communication as a leader. Brief example, my colleague Tim, who's on the supply chain stage, he asked me yesterday whether we should be going for breakfast at 7. I replied, I'm a supporter of this synergised relocation, logistics and sustenance programme. It uses a combination of holistic and sustainable transport strategy and a conduit for the achievement of smart and agile goals, delivery, critical business impact. Or yes, would have covered that. So I think I've been doing this too long, haven't I? The importance of quality communication from leadership. Yeah. How is that underestimated in your view?
I think it's definitely underestimated, but it's an area that needs to occur. And what do I mean by that is that communications is absolutely essence, right? If you go through any kind of transformation or you try to implement any type of big new solution across an organization, in particular a matrix organization, the importance of communication is absolutely vital to the success of that transformation. You know, a lot of times people think management knows much more than the worker on the line or in the factory, right? And sometimes that could be the truth, but I think that's not always the truth, because a lot of times leaders are just at the same level of understanding what and how the transformation will have an impact of the organization, that they cannot just have all the answers yet. So I think you can never over-communicate, in my opinion. I think it's also okay for leadership to say, hey, we don't have an answer for this particular situation yet, or for the next steps of this particular program. So I think communication is absolutely essence. And you know, if you just think about some of the recent events from executives and leadership, is many of us have been faced with the situation of the tariffs right now, right? And tariffs were really pretty much impacting the US primarily because they were implemented by our administration here in the United States. But if we would not properly communicated some of these impacts to our global supply chain groups around the world and our networks, we could have some huge issues down the road by importing products that had steel from China into the US, which all of a sudden would have been at one point of time up to 150% taxed on tariffs on, right? So I think this communication and keeping the network informed about major decisions, major transformation is absolutely crucial. As a company, we are actually going through one of our major transformation right now. Many of us know us as an industrial manufacturing company, but we are actually moving under a new, into a new era and calling ourselves a one tech company. Now think about it, we are a 178-year-old manufacturing company, and now we are entering to become a one tech company. So that's a huge transformation for a company of our size. So, and the communication is absolutely crucial. I think you can never over-communicate when it comes to new technologies, how they will impact the organization, and transformations that will change the organization.
Well, that leads us on nicely to my next question. That is preparing a team for the future when there's these transformations happening. How can leaders really get their teams ready for these future challenges? Because they need to be prepared. You need to have an AI-ready workforce or whatever that transformation may be. From your experience, how do you go about that preparation?
Yeah, I think leaders need to understand their workforces much better. I think we all assume we know our workforce, but we are at a very pivotal point of time right now. If you think about it, there are 6 different generations in the workforce today. And if you think about the expectations, capabilities, and mindsets of these 6 different generations in our workforce, we really need to understand each of them well, and we need to understand how can we deploy them with the right tasks, with the right information, and with the right tools for them to be successful in the future. So that's certainly one of the key areas that I think it's sometimes underestimated, is really understanding how is your workforce structured today, and how does it differentiate from generation to generation, right? I mean, we have everything from the silent generation, which are the Warren Buffetts of this world, to the alpha generation, which are our TikTok experts out there who can deal with technology much different. So if we understand that, we can truly build a very strong cultural mindset within the organization to successfully implement digitalization transformation within companies.
From a personal point of view, though, what have you learned when it comes to dealing with teams to actually develop that change in mindset? Any particular examples you'd have where you feel you've achieved of succeeding in that area?
Yeah, I think one is certainly ensuring and allowing the teams to give them the opportunity to play with new technology, I call it. A lot of times when big companies roll out tools, it's a kind of a global standard mandate. Here's a new tool, and somebody in an Eiffel Tower decided this is the new solution to be and rolls it out globally. I think that has not worked very well for us in large corporations. So what we have done, we have taken a little bit of different approach in the sense of looking into how do we create certain segments across the world that do certain proof of concept on new technologies, right? And do like a test trial period of new technology. So does not always mean that headquarters has to be the one who comes up with the greatest, latest solution. It could be that some regional procurement organization in Asia and South America or anywhere else than headquarters has the opportunity to test and try a new solution. And that really has helped us to want to create a culture where people are excited about testing and playing with new technology. And also excited because it's not always this top-down mandated technology pushed down from headquarters of somebody sitting somewhere in one part of the world knowing exactly how the world operates and that this tool will solve all our problems. It created an excitement, and it created also the acceptance that sometimes the technology can be found, scoped, tested, and then scaled up out of the region. And so that's been one of the experiences I have seen has been quite successful within our company to really drive technology and create that excitement around it.
And that takes real humility, real honesty to be strong enough to say, we're testing this. You know what? This might not work. This might work. And that's not an easy thing to have if you're having to go to whoever is holding those purse strings and say, this thing we thought was going to be wonderful, you know what? It's not right for us. Is that a difficult culture to develop?
It is, absolutely. You know, I qualified it as the failure culture, right? At the end of the day, we don't see failure as something negative. We do understand that new technologies, we don't know much about it. We don't know how it really impacts our existing processes. We don't know how it's going to drive efficiency within the organization. So we don't expect this testing to be successful 100% of the time. So we don't penalize for folks when a project after 6 months, a year, or even 2 years will be sunset because it just didn't achieve what the objectives were of the tool. What we're trying to learn is, and that's where the important aspect is we try not to make the same mistake twice when it comes to new tools and new technologies. And we learn from our mistakes. And having a very strong network of these professional folks within the organization who are working and testing these tools, and they communicate very closely together, we ensure that we're not trying to make the same mistake twice in some of these deployments and tests of these tools. And I think that's truly something that a lot of companies have not adopted, is kind of this failure is an option as long as you don't make the same mistake twice.
Yeah, failure can actually be a positive sometimes. Yeah. One word you've mentioned a lot during our discussion is people, which always encourages me. And for you, why is people management so important for success with a supply chain?
You know, I think absolutely people is absolutely crucial. One, I mentioned already we have multiple generations, but as we talked about, as supply chain is moving away from just a cost cutter and potentially seen as a bottleneck within an organization that delays things and everybody knows how to do procurement much better, we are moving into solving complex problems for the companies and negotiating complex problems. And with the addition of technology, I think it's very important that we take the time to educate and train our employees in the right way to create what I call a resilient supply chain organization. And in order to do that, there are certain things that needs to occur with the organization. One is you certainly will have to have on-job skill training. You certainly will have some coaching and mentoring requirement, and then there will be some aspects of classroom learning. And if you kind of take these through buckets, research has shown that if you do that with your organization, you create higher retention, higher customer satisfaction, and higher resilience as an organization. So if you find the right mix of really educating, coaching, and educational training, you create a resilient organization to ensure that you can drive any type of projects in the future or any disruptions that might be coming your way successfully.
Just to develop on your point there about some of the learning that needs to happen, what kind of skills do you think the procurement and supply chain leaders of tomorrow need to have? They need to be a very different animal to one who was maybe a leader 15, 20 years ago. For you, what would those skills need to be?
You know, when we talk about the evolution, and we look back 10 years ago, there was a lot of focus on technology skill sets, right? And understanding technology, RPA, how do we drive efficiency in certain tools, like become more efficient in RPAs and things like that. And I think one of the skill sets we have not been focusing much on is really the social and soft skills. As we are evolving and as technology evolves, some of the, call it more repeatable tasks that we are facing will be taken over by machines. And as we are evolving in solving more complex solutions for the business and negotiating more complex solution, I think this whole soft skill aspect is something we need to continue to further develop. Why? Because it will require much closer collaboration with your cross-functional partners, and it will require much closer collaboration with your strategic suppliers. It will not be enough by just sitting across the table and once a year to talk about pricing. You will actually go into really detailed discussions and also share information that maybe historically you wouldn't have not shared with your suppliers because you felt it was only as a need-to-know basis for them. But if you have to really try to solve complex solutions for the companies and negotiate complex solutions, I think it's about this open partnership and trust between you and your supplier to have these candid discussions as well. So I think this whole soft skill area is something that we need to continue to focus on. I felt it's been put on the back burner for the last few years, but I think it's going to become more super important moving on forward.
Absolutely. I do want to get on to how leaders should prioritise and how they should stay focused in a moment. But I would like to throw open to the room to see if we have any questions at all, which is, again, where everyone decides now is the time to scratch their ear and readjust their hair. Do we have any questions from the room? You're just doing it on purpose now, all of you, aren't you? Right, I'll continue with my questions. When it comes to prioritising and staying focused, there was a wonderful expression used on this stage yesterday about, I think it was institutionalised inertia. When people know there's a huge amount of projects on, there's lots of ideas, there's lots of technological solutions out there, but not enough changes because there's almost too much to focus on. For your thoughts on how the best leaders can really prioritise?
I think you have to make sure that your prioritization is in line with the corporate strategy your company is driving to, right? I mean, we got to be always cautious in that regard as well. If the overall organization is not on the same speed, on the same track as you are from prioritizing what's important for the overall objectives, then sometimes you have contradicting KPIs, which could result in some internal turmoil when supply chain is trying to do X, Y, and Z while the company is trying to use a different direction. So I think for leaders, it's very important to also understand what's the overarching strategic goal of the company, and then making sure that your strategy within procurement supply chain supports that strategy and is 100% aligned with that. And once that occurs, then you can certainly be able to set your priorities. And your priorities might look different in a supply chain that might be in the United States versus a supply chain in Europe or in Asia. So I just recently read an article where the number one priority in the US supply chain procurement folks is resilience, versus if you look into Europe, right now the number one priority in supply chains is value creation. And if you look in Asia, it's really cost saving. So you can also see that priorities in supply chains might shift regionally from one part of the world to the other. And I think that's also very important that, again, a one-size approach does not solve and will not allow the organization to perform at the maximum level, because there are different regional requirements that need to occur because of economic situation, geopolitical situation. So that's very important to also understand. And then you can really help set the priorities, what is needed in order to build a successful supply chain organization.
Yes, learning those global variances, I do think is very important. Sure. And one last question, if I can, before we wrap up, and I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. And it's the biggest lesson you've learned personally from your supply chain leadership journey. What's the main lesson you have learned through that time?
You know, I think what I have learned is the value that supply chain can bring to the overall success of the company. You know, we are not just a bottom line impact function. We actually can have an impact that can be top line driven, that can create innovation, that can create quality. And so I think that with this new value creation that we put into place, it's just amazing how much more willingness you experience from cross-functional partners to work with you because you don't have that one single KPI anymore that was cost, 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 cost. Now you're trying to help them achieve their objectives. And I think that is the true evolution I really enjoyed over my 25 years that I've seen in procurement, is really coming to that point of that we have this opportunity to really work much closer with our cross-functional partners.
Absolutely. Well, that seems like a lovely place to round us up. So I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much. Up on this stage in just a couple of moments, we're joined by Anne Waldnick, Principal at Oliver Wyman. We're talking the silent champion, how indirect procurement wins in tariff time. So we're continuing that part of that conversation. But for now, our thanks, and thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.